It's a U.S. ceasefire plan that has stirred heated debate in Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu is warned by his allies that their coalition will collapse if he accepts it. Hamas said it's positive, but work still needs to be done. So, could President Joe Biden's proposal end the war on Gaza? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Cyril Vanier. Another proposal to end the war in Gaza. U.S. President Joe Biden has announced a three-phase plan he says paves the way for a ceasefire in the Strip. But the challenge now is how to get both Israel and Hamas to accept it. The White House argues that if the group accepts this deal, then Israel will too. But as soon as it was announced, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's allies threatened to quit his government if he treated it positively. And Netanyahu himself has reiterated what he's been saying since October 7th, that Hamas must be destroyed and the Israeli captives in Gaza returned. So does Biden's deal stand any chance of success? We'll talk to our guests in a moment. First, though, this report by Ibtisam Genfoud.
It's time for this war to end.
A firm declaration from U.S. President Joe Biden putting forward what he says is an Israeli proposal to end the war. The three-phase plan includes the withdrawal of troops from populated areas of Gaza, the release of Israeli captives in exchange for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, and deliveries of aid into the Strip. On the streets of Tel Aviv, protesters calling for the return of 125 Israelis still held in Gaza had a clear message for their government.
I'm here to support my government in taking this deal, the deal that Netanyahu suggested, our Prime Minister, that will get all our people back home.
Hamas officials have signaled they're viewing the proposal favorably, but not so Israeli leaders. Benjamin Netanyahu called it a non-starter, saying Hamas needed to be eliminated before the war can end. Far-right ministers have repeatedly refused any ceasefire and threatened to quit his coalition government, something the Prime Minister wants to avoid. But Washington says Hamas's military capabilities have been reduced enough to avoid a new October 7th scenario. And the moment has come for a 6-week pause in the fighting, followed by negotiations and the reconstruction of the Strip. Israeli soldiers have destroyed 50,000 homes in Gaza's north and left its largest refugee camp in ruins.
During the first Israeli incursion, my shop was destroyed, and we managed to reopen it after some repairs. Now, after the second incursion, as you can see, there's nothing left. Even if they demolish the shop once more, I'll stand firm and won't leave.
The U.S. says if Hamas takes the deal, Israel will too. A similar plan was accepted by the Palestinian group last month, but rejected at the last minute by Israeli leaders. Between delays and contradictory statements, more work is likely to be needed before any ceasefire can be agreed. Until then, Palestinians can only hope that if that happens, there'll be enough left in Gaza to salvage. Ibtisam Genfoud, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
All right, let's bring in all our guests. In Tel Aviv, Alon Liel is a former Israeli Foreign Ministry spokesman and ambassador. In Montreal, Mouin Rabbani is a non-resident fellow at the Center for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies. Mouin is also co-editor of the online magazine Jazeera. In Washington, D.C., Akbar Shahid Ahmed is the senior diplomatic correspondent for HuffPost. Welcome to Inside Story to all of you. I want to start with a very quick temperature take on this following question. And I'm hoping for now just for a yes, maybe, or no answer. Do you think the moment that we're in now is ultimately going to lead to a ceasefire? Alon?
Will not end the war.
Mouin?
Probably not.
Akbar?
Maybe and probably no.
Okay, so that was useful. So not a great deal of optimism as far as this ceasefire plan is concerned. Let's get into the details of it. Akbar, what was the play for Biden? On Friday, he delivers this surprise speech. I think it was a surprise for many. He presents what he says is an Israeli plan, but since then we've understood there's some daylight between, but he's the one who's presenting it, which first of all is a little strange. And secondly, we've understood there's daylight between him and the Israelis on it. What was the play for the US president?
So important to remember for the Biden administration, we're still working on persuasion, right? They're not thinking about American leverage over Israel in terms of military, diplomatic support, other forms of support that the US provides that make the Israeli offensive possible, right? So Biden is not saying, as he did a few weeks ago, I'm withholding bombs unless you do this. What he's done with this, as you're saying, in this play, is rely on the Biden administration's preferred battlefield, which is the battlefield of narratives, right? So they want to say, look at us, we are reasonable, and in fact, we are still with Israel. We're telling you this is the Israeli proposal. Obviously, that's very hard to do when you haven't cleared that with the Israeli side first. But the hope for the Biden administration was by saying, where with Israel, we are aligned on this, the ball is in Hamas's court, they're creating an avenue, in their view, for Israel to come to what they see as a logical conclusion here, right? Which is ending the fighting for now, allowing in humanitarian aid, easing the crisis. All of that to say, Cyril, I mean, if it's not backed up with a real push from the US side, it's really hard to see if that's anything more than spin, right, or drama. I was talking earlier today to a State Department official, quite well informed, who was saying, look, Netanyahu has already told us this isn't going to matter unless there are consequences. So now for a lot of people in Washington, including people in the administration who were involved in creating this, right, there's not a huge amount of optimism. And in a way, we're waiting for the next shoe to drop. So the first shoe was the president announcing this sudden speech. And now it is, will Biden create any consequences for Netanyahu?
Alon, as we mentioned in the intro, you headed Israel's foreign ministry previously. How do you read this moment? The U.S. president saying, here's a deal, by the way, it's Israel's deal, yet he's the one presenting it, and Israel doesn't completely agree with it seems.
Yeah, the mere fact that Biden had to expose the deal, not Israel, is saying that he was very worried that Netanyahu will chicken out. He put him in front of a certain mirror and said, this is what your cabinet approved, now go ahead. And Netanyahu is already partially denying it, which was expected. Biden tried to go directly to the Israeli public above the head of Netanyahu and tell them, this is what your prime minister agreed. I think it's the best plan you can get, and I agree with it. Go ahead, put the necessary pressure. In a way, he's also telling the world, go ahead and put pressure on the sides to move on. I personally think that the big mistake, the big American mistake here, is that simultaneously, without Netanyahu confirming publicly the plan, he was invited to address the Congress. For Netanyahu, who is it's his fourth invitation, it's a world record. Churchill is the second one with 3 invitations to address the Congress. It's a wonderful excuse to postpone things and say, I will explain to the American people and to the Congress what I'm about to do.
Mouin, so Alon mentioned something, that Netanyahu has been invited to speak before a joint session of the U.S. Congress. And he wasn't invited just by one congressional leader or just by the Republicans. No, he was invited by all the senior congressional leaders, Senate, House of Representatives, Republican and Democrats. Even, by the way, for our viewers who know this in some detail, this story, even by Chuck Schumer, the Senate leader, right, who has been extremely critical of Netanyahu and called for election. So they all called for Netanyahu to come. How do you read that? How does that play? How does that factor into this?
Well, based on what Mr. Liel just said, I think it's clear that if Biden thinks he can go over Netanyahu's head and appeal directly to Israeli public opinion, it's in fact Netanyahu who can go over Biden's head and appeal directly to U.S. political elites and U.S. voters. I think the background here is quite strange, as the other two speakers have indicated. It was a U.S. president who publicly presented what he claimed is an Israeli offer or something Israel has already agreed to. Then the Israeli prime minister suggests actually what Biden presented is somewhat different than what Israel had agreed to. Then a senior U.S. official says, in fact, the Israelis formulated this proposal, but did so in confidence and asked us not to make it public, which Biden, of course, did, putting the ball squarely in the Palestinians' court. And now you have very senior Israeli government ministers saying they know nothing about it, and that if Israel agrees to it, they're going to collapse the coalition. Who's lying? Probably all of them. It's just too much. It's too much for words. And I think failure is being set up to once again place the blame on the Palestinians. And the second point I would make is that Biden has repeatedly engaged in such maneuvers where he's seeking to exercise pressure on the Israeli leadership. But the moment the Israelis refuse to bend to such pressure or push back, U.S. pressure collapses, and it ends up being pressure on the Americans rather than on the Israelis.
To that point, Akbar, you're in Washington, D.C. You're talking to your sources in and around the administration, in the political orbit, right, of the Biden administration. We're 3 days removed from the speech. How do they feel about their move 3 days on? Do they think, master move, we've kind of pressured, the Israelis, they're going to have to do something? Or do they think, we might find ourselves with egg on our faces, I would add again?
I think there's still a degree of confidence. It's not a high level of confidence, but there is a degree of confidence they can get somewhere. I think Mouin's point was an astute one about American political elite opinion, right? One thing that this administration has been afraid of since October 7th, given the historical scale of the attacks and the trauma that not just Israelis felt, but many people in this country with ties to Israel, Jewish Americans and others, the administration has been extremely paranoid about looking insufficiently close to Israel. And that may sound to people who are saying, look, 36,000 Palestinians dead, the war is nowhere near over, famine is underway. Have you really not been close enough to the Israelis? For the Biden team, that's still a dominating theme, right? So that's still very much going to be part of their calculus as Netanyahu comes to Congress. On the flip side, this was also a political speech that they devised not just with an eye to Gaza's suffering and an eye to Israel's security, but with an eye to the November presidential election, right? And so they're thinking from a masterstroke perspective, maybe we can make all sides happy. Right now, the Israeli side isn't happy. You've also seen Arab and Muslim Americans who have been really critical of Biden come out and say precisely a little bit of what Mouin is saying, you're putting the ball on the Palestinians, you're going to blame them, and also saying, how is this where we are this many months into the war, and with Biden's own sort of stated limit on Rafah being crossed daily, right? As all these talks have been happening, let's just zoom out and remember there have still been Israeli strikes within Gaza, right? There's still limits on aid. We're now close to a month of no aid being allowed in, medical or food or any of that. And so I don't see who the administration is making happy, but they are a group that sees themselves as
the second. On this issue, I want to pick you up on a point you just made, that the the Biden administration is, quote, paranoid that they might appear insufficiently close to Israel. That's what you said. So I want to make sure our viewers understand this. The Biden administration, for as much as they've tried to placate the pro-Palestinian demonstrators on campuses, they've tried to show since the beginning of the war that they care about Palestinian suffering, and they've come out often belatedly, but they've come out with statements in support of Palestinians, et cetera. You're saying that the bottom line political calculus for them is they need to be close enough to Israel.
I think there's two aspects to that, right? One is that fundamentally the political elite in this country across both parties is overwhelmingly pro-Israel, right? They may not be pro-Netanyahu, but they believe in the US-Israel alliance. It's a long-standing relationship, and that includes people in the Democratic Party, right? So when you had Leader Schumer come out and say, I don't want Netanyahu, the subtext to all that is not, maybe we should re-examine this relationship. The subtext is, I don't like dealing with this guy on the other end of the phone. Get me someone else on the other end of the phone. And then there is a question of donors. There's a question of how is this going to affect Biden's re-election? So when Biden, for instance, held up bombs for Israel in May, you saw Haim Saban, a major Democratic Party donor, directly reach out to some of Biden's top political advisors and say, why is the president doing this? This is a billionaire, right, who's given tons of money to Democrats. And he felt not just comfortable reaching out to the president's top political advisors, he then leaked that to several reporters. So there's huge political pressure continuing. Yes, there's some more concessions to the pro-Palestinian side, but the instinct, particularly for an old-school politician like Biden, is, am I doing enough to make the pro-Israel side happy?
Okay, so Alon, so that was the U.S. political calculus. Let's talk about Netanyahu's political calculus and whether it has changed in the last 3 days. One thing is not a surprise at all is that his far-right ministers have said, we don't want this deal because they don't want to end the war, right? They want to keep fighting against Hamas. That's not a surprise. We know that. They haven't changed their view. However, Yair Lapid, head of the opposition, has said to Netanyahu, if you lose the far-right by accepting this deal, if you lose their support, you've got our support. We'll have your back and you'll keep some form of coalition in parliament and therefore you'll keep your job. Do you think Netanyahu would do that?
Look, what Biden's speech did, it sharpened the division inside the Israeli public between the right and the center left. And as you said, no surprises with the right. Also, no surprises with the center left that is wholeheartedly welcoming this plan. What it also did, in addition to sharpening the division here, it put Netanyahu exactly in the middle in a position that he can choose. He personally can choose anytime. If he wants to go with the right or with the center, he has the two options. So it's up to him completely. If the two right-wing ministers will leave, one of them, by the way, said today that Netanyahu is not showing him the plan. He didn't see anything in writing, so Netanyahu is kind of hiding it. But if they decide to leave, he will immediately get the support of the backing. But this will mean that he breaks his historic alliance with the extreme right and the religious parties, and it might be the end of his political career. So he can choose, and I think this is the reason that he will try to delay, and until he comes to the Congress, formulate his view to the American people and explain exactly what he's doing. I'm almost sure that as in the past, he will have a standing ovation, will come back as the hero, and still do nothing.
Well, still now, you think he would be welcomed as a hero by a joint session of the U.S. Congress, even under the present circumstances? A reminder, he's been invited, it's between now and the next 8 weeks, I believe. By then, arrest warrants may have been issued against him by the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. We don't know, but that seems very possible at this point.
Look, we have, Netanyahu has so much experience in congressional speeches and UN speeches. He is a professional. He pre-arranges the support inside the Congress, the applause inside the Congress. He is a fantastic speaker. And again, he will come back to Israel supported by the Congress. Also here, it will be about 4 months before the American elections. All the considerations in American politics are the elections, and they probably do not want to show that if he's dropping him and dropping the Jewish state and dropping the friendship with Israel. So I think if he will not make up his mind until the trip to the United States, if the Americans will not force him to make up his mind before the trip, after the trip, it will be easier for him to just forget about this plan.
Mouin, we started this conversation about the driving question was whether this moment might compel both sides, Israel and Hamas, to accept a deal. We've been talking a lot about Netanyahu. I have a better understanding of the political calculus on the U.S. side, the Israeli side. No one has said so far, yes, Netanyahu is now under the gun to accept this deal. Do you agree with that? There's no particular pressure on him that there wasn't already to accept a deal.
I think that's a fair characterization. As you've seen, Netanyahu has come out with public statements about a deal that he appears to be the one who formulated it, saying that, yes, we will agree to a temporary ceasefire during which we engage in an exchange of captives, and then 6 weeks later, our genocidal assault on the Gaza Strip will resume and will continue until Hamas is destroyed. Look, I do believe that both the U.S. administration and the Israeli government are operating on the basis of narrow partisan political calculations. But I also think it's much more than that. Even if there were no U.S. elections this year, Biden and his most senior officials have had a lifelong, passionate attachment to Israel. Throughout their political career, they have seen Palestinians as less than human and essentially as irrelevant and expendable human scum. So they really have no problem with what Israel is doing to the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip in terms of reducing also the entire territory to rubble. As far as Netanyahu is concerned, yes, of course, he would like to remain in power in order to avoid the consequences of the various legal cases that have been directed against him. But it also goes far beyond that. October 7th was for the Israeli political and security leadership a failure of historic proportions. And the primary reason they're continuing to prosecute this war is so that they can make some kind of strategic achievement so that when they have to take responsibility for their failures afterwards, they can claim that they compensated for October 7th by, for example, eliminating the Hamas leadership, expelling the population to Sinai, destroying Hamas's military capabilities, and so on. And what I think the U.S. is doing now is basically telling the Israelis, you have failed for 8 months. You're not going to succeed in the next 8 months. And it's really time to put an end to this before the entire region blows up. But again, when advice and persuasion is not backed up with pressure and leverage, it's just empty words.
Alon, I have a wide question for you, a big picture question for you on Israel's strategic vision. Because I haven't heard a strategic vision being articulated, whether it's by Gallant, whether it's by Netanyahu. None of the leaders have said this is what we want for, it's in vogue to say the day after. But even before this war, there didn't appear to be a strategic vision by Israel on how do we live with Palestinians, right? If you take Gaza, West Bank, and Israel, there are about 7.3 Israelis, 7.3 Palestinians. So there's an acute question of how do we live together or side by side? What's the arrangement? And Israel has done annexation, settlement, occupation, blockade, and regular wars with Gaza. You were Director General of the Foreign Ministry. How is that question sort of tackled within the diplomatic community?
Look, historically, until 10 years ago, there was an Israeli vision of two states. 10 years ago, this vision was shoved aside, and the government repeatedly said no two states, no Palestinian state, and was trying to lead to an annexation of Zone C in the West Bank. So the policy before the 7th of October was very clear. No Palestinian state. The issue of a Palestinian state had a comeback because of the war, an international comeback. And now what Netanyahu is saying, look, why should I speak on long term? We are in the middle of a horrible war in which we lost already 1,600 people. Let me finish this war. Let me eliminate Hamas, and we'll speak on the day after I see Hamas eliminated. So at this point, I agree with you. At this point, Israel doesn't have a long term. Israel has a wish to eliminate Hamas and to maybe decide on the future afterwards.
Akbar, and I think this is probably going to be the final question. Do you get a sense, what is your sense of the Biden administration's next move? They have laid out a plan. They are daring both sides to accept it. What next?
Well, I just want to quickly pick up on something Alon said, because I thought it was quite important, that the Israelis have very clearly, even pre-October 7th, moved away from a two-state solution framework. And for the Biden administration and the US, that's been the touchstone, right? That's been the cover for decades of allowing and supporting occupation and devastating, Israeli campaigns and alleged war crimes has been, well, one day we're going to get to two-state. Prior to October 7th, the Biden administration essentially was saying, we're okay not even ever talking about that again, right? So this is now back to the fore. I think that gets to this question of what's the next move for them, because they have not shown an interest in a long-term solution and settlement for Israelis and Palestinians. That's never been their priority. Some of them, Mouin pointed out, have had a long-term kind of opposition to Palestinians. I think they don't know where to go next. I think they're really, really hoping that the mediators, the Egyptians and the Qataris, can play a big role here. Important to remember that Egypt has said our peace treaty with Israel might be at risk. That's something Israel might care about and might shape their calculus. But I don't think you've seen the Biden administration reach a decision on, we'll pull this back. And because the military operations are ongoing and they're not stopping the military support, they're in a corner of their own making, right? They don't really know how to get out. And so their reflex is unquestioned, largely full tilt support for Israel. The more Israel can say we're being persecuted, ICC warrants, you're pushing us into a corner, the Biden administration will say, oh my gosh, we're sorry, we have to show you even more support, despite everything we've seen over all these months.
Okay, thank you. That's all the time we have for today's discussion, but I want to thank all our guests, Alon Liel, Mouin Rabbani, Akbar, Shahid, Ahmed. Thank you, too, for watching the program. You can see it again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on X. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Cyril Vanier, and the whole team here in Doha, bye for now.